Very nice to see you, Charles.
Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam Kotzko. I have been teaching in the Shimer program for 10 years now, 6 years at the independent tiny Shimer, and then 4 years at North Central.
And Daniela?
I unmute myself. Yeah, I've also, just like Adam, been teaching at Shimer for 10 years now, the last 4 years at North Central College, and my background is in history of science.
And Catherine?
Hi, yeah, I'm Catherine Keenan. I have been teaching at Carthage College for the last 6 years in their formerly Western Heritage, now Intellectual Foundations program. And I also formerly taught at the Columbia Core program, Contemporary Civilization.
Great. Aaron?
Yeah, I'm Aaron Dunlap. I'm at Shimer. I came to Shimer with Adam and Daniela. So when Adam said 10 years, I thought he had made a mistake, but I guess it has been 10 years. My degree's in religion. And yeah, I'll be talking a little bit later.
And Bridget, I've invited everyone just to introduce themselves because we're a relatively small group. And
happy to. So I'm Bridget Trogdon. I work at Clemson University. I am the Associate Dean for undergrads. So general education is in my wheelhouse, but I'm a liberal artist first. My doctorate's in chemistry, but thank you for letting me play and learn. And we're also working on a transformative texts program to help revitalize our humanities components of the general education curriculum. So this topic is very interesting to me. And previously at Mercer with Charlie and a number of other fantastic people.
oh, wonderful, great. Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear how you hear what we say. And Stephanie, are you with us?
I am.
Great.
So I'm at Barrett, the Honors College at Arizona State University. I've been at ASU as faculty since '99, but I've been in Barrett since 2010. And that was my first real exposure to core texts, and I fell in love with it immediately. And yeah, I was inspired this morning too about the Purdue example, and I just don't know if we could do something like that at ASU on the scale that we're at, because we have, you know, over 100,000 students if you count our online students, and about 90,000 on the ground. And so that's a lot of work to do, but I'm wondering if I have it in me to either approach our esteemed president, Michael Crow, who's fancy pants, but I have a little bit of a relationship with him. I always send him the funny things students make fun of him about, and he seems to enjoy it. And I do have some sort of connection with the chief of humanities stuff at ASU. So I'm gonna have to get through this semester and recover a bit, and then I'm gonna think on that. But I've often thought that we need to rename Gen Ed from something else, like that, the word they used this morning, you know, something cornerstone that gives it more meaning than just Gen Ed. But I'm jabbering too much now.
Great, thank you for joining us. So I'll go ahead and start. And I have a sense that most of you all know, beyond my colleagues, most of you all know of Shimer and its model generally, but I'll go ahead and describe it, and I'll describe it in a sort of interested way in terms of what it was as a college and what it has become, at least currently, as a school. And I think the problem that I'm going to present, which is not the exclusive issue that we're going to be talking about, but it's a sort of an overview, is what are we offering anymore as an education? And sort of thinking about that term holistically, what do we mean by that? And the premise of my talk is that education could be considered along the lines of a kind of Sorites problem, where a curriculum becomes a course. Where do you stop having an education? or do you? Can you see the world in a grain of sand, as it were, and take a single course in a great books curriculum and represent the whole with the part to some extent? So that's kind of my question. And I'll motivate it by describing very briefly the transition that we've made from being a four-year independent college, following what we generally refer to as the Hutchins program, which is to say that curriculum in its general outlines that was authored by Hutchins and his colleagues at the University of Chicago starting in the late 30s, really, but through the 40s and into the early 50s, refined into a kind of four-part project that embraced the humanities, the social sciences, the natural sciences as three areas, and then something that they called integrative studies. The details get a little bit murky as the decades pass, but that general outline is what we preserved at Shimer College from 1950 to 2017, when we ceased being Shimer College and became, on June 1st, whatever instant of that day it happened, I don't know, but we transitioned from being a college to a school within North Central College, which some of you may not know is a small, sort of regionally situated liberal arts college outside of Chicago in Naperville, Illinois. And the mere fact that they were in a position to acquire us in 2017 at what I think is probably a relatively modest cost to them, nonetheless, I think speaks well of them to the extent that they were able to do that when many places around us were closing under circumstances that we saw. So I think that we, I don't know, choose your metaphor, dodged a bullet, escaped barely with our lives, however you want to construe it. We were, as it were, saved. Saved for what remains the question, I think. For the last 4 years, well, going back to 2016, we were in the position of having to revise our curriculum in ways that are sort of uninteresting because we had to go from a semester to a trimester curriculum, and then immediately in the next year from a trimester curriculum back to a semester curriculum, because North Central College was undergoing its own transition from being a trimesterly to a semesterly calendar. More importantly, for our interests, it was also adopting a new general education program in the year that we were coming into North Central. So we saw ourselves being adopted, a college being turned into a department, but a college that had a full college curriculum, and trying to find places for that full college curriculum, again on the Hutchins model, in the interstices of a full complement of traditional academic departments, and with a new general education program coming on board that we witnessed being formulated as we arrived. Without much ado, I'll just describe the general education curriculum at North Central as one of a variation on the theme of a distribution model, with a couple of what they like to describe as vertically integrated courses for everybody, and sort of souped up composition course, a speech course, and then a senior seminar, all of which we have taught among us, among the Shimer faculty, that is, so we can describe those in some more detail for anyone who might be curious. But the picture is one in which we, as a great books program with a very generalized curriculum, we're now accompanying a liberal arts college and a general education program in its own right, and trying to find students for our courses. One of the things that I should note is that as an independent college, we had the distinction of having small class sizes, smaller even than, say, St. John's. At St. John's, my understanding is that right now, Phil, you can correct me if this is wrong, but my understanding is that the tutorial courses in languages, sciences, and music are generally hover somewhere between 15 and 20 students, and that the seminars are somewhere between 20 and 25. Is that about right?
They're not quite that large, and
Okay.
particularly this last year,
Yeah.
when it's all been on Zoom, the tutorials are closer to 12, and the
Okay.
seminars not too much larger than that, maybe 14 or 15.
Let me just ask you, is that a factor of enrollment, or is a decision by St. John's to reduce the size of their courses? Because when I was there, they were somewhat larger than that. Not terribly larger,
It's
but
a
somewhat larger.
decision about what actually works on Zoom. Enrollment, as it turns out, is up, and spectacularly up in the Graduate Institute, because now students can do their courses online, so they don't have to move to Santa Fe or Annapolis. And so the enrollment in the Graduate Institute is almost tripled from 2 years ago.
Well, that's good news for us, because I'll segue by just noting that when we did arrive at North Central, we had long had ambitions to create a master's program of our own. We had made halting steps in that direction to create a program of teacher education. We were doing that remotely, but that was back in the aughts. So we were sort of on the sill of that kind of development. We have since inherited the liberal studies, Master of Liberal Studies degree program at North Central. So we're administering that now. And the fact that you're getting increased enrollments in your master's program, I hope bodes well for us. But it'd be interesting to hear more about how that's been working for you.
What I have heard and what comes over the email is that they have made the decision within the past couple of months to continue this online offering, even after the circumstances of the pandemic are no longer compelling us to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Aaron is the director of the MALS program. I think we've more or less decided the same. And so that's something that would be interesting to talk about among us, is what the advent of people's familiarity and relative comfort with online Great Books discussions will mean for our programs in general. So let me turn briefly to Scott's essay and raise some maybe more interesting questions, having described our basic transit from college to school. That I think one of the things that I had to figure out how to formulate within this transition was our sense of our intellectual enterprise now that we are on the North Central campus. And I'm not wedded to my formulation of it, but I'll offer this as maybe a counterpoint, Scott, to what you were indicating as the range of possibilities in your essay for thinking about the relationship of the disciplines to general education. What I offered by way of a sort of a justification of our existence on the North Central campus was that we remained forthrightly a general education program, that is the Shimer curriculum. But we did so in the name of the specialization in general education, because we couldn't claim to be the general education program. And I don't think that I'm mincing words when I say that we are something of a specialization in general education. That is to say, we take that program of looking for the integrative possibilities among the disciplines and looking for a kind of longitudinal relationship between bodies of knowledge and even techniques, laboratory or otherwise, as our purview, and to introduce to North Central, which, without, I think, being insulting or revealing anything that is contrary to how they view themselves, has been split into its component departments and disciplines, and that distribution model that they have for their general education program, if anything, abets that split into disciplines. The general education in the consciousness of a student is at North Central, as it is so many other places, a set of obstacles as much as it is a set of opportunities, which is unfortunate, but that's to play it as it lies, as it were. And I think what we would like to do is present ourselves as an alternative to that view of general education, that general education needn't be a series of disconnected obstacles, but it'd be a possibility for integrated practice and thought. Now, I say that in view of the fact that the reality for us is that we have seen diminishing enrollments to the point where we only have a handful of new students in our program who are doing anything like the entire Shimer curriculum anymore, and are going to avail themselves of the riches of the curriculum as we've developed them and husbanded them or stewarded them, as it were. And we are now teaching the majority of our students in a course at a time. And as my colleagues will detail in their descriptions of teaching our courses and taking their methods of teaching into general education courses in other departments, we're finding that is where most of our energy lies, is not in cultivating minds across the curriculum, but in doing what we can in a course at a time with students who are there for any variety of reasons, not always the most edifying. So that's the problem. And I invite us to consider the possibilities. Given that general description, I can get more into details when it comes time for us to open up a conversation. But I just really want to set the stage for what my colleagues will describe in more detail of their experience in classrooms and doing this kind of work, that is trying to take a general education in the form of a Great Books program and make it more than a distribution. So with that, I will turn it over to whomever among my colleagues would like to volunteer to go next. I don't want to put anyone on the spot directly, but if anyone feels up to picking up the baton at this point, I offer it to you. Do I need to call on someone?
I mean, I'm happy to go next. It's just,
Okay,
I wasn't going to offer because in a way my theme is a little bit different from everybody else's. Everybody else is sort of talking about the difficulties of teaching gen ed. I am, my comment is a little bit different. I'm sort of talking about the fact that when we were brought into North Central, we were basically put in competition with a set of other departments. So as you can see, I called my paper, my intervention, Dueling Banjos, competing with the College of Arts and Sciences of your own institution. I'm just going to briefly sort of make a few points and then hopefully open it for other people to comment. So when Shimer College and its Great Books curriculum was acquired by North Central College, it was ambiguously placed in an institution that already had a College of Arts and Sciences with a full complement of overlapping disciplines and departments. I want to argue that, in fact, a Great Books program, which is intentionally not disciplinary, can show a path towards making humanities and social science topics attractive and relevant to students today, who overall reject specialization in any particular humanity. English degrees and history degrees, as we know, are not super popular these days. So as we all know, undergraduate majors in the humanities have been in decline in the United States since the 2007 and 2008 financial crisis, even before then. The losses, drops of 50% or more in many departments, average drops of 25 to 30% across all disciplines, are considerably higher than the overall declines in enrollments across higher education. The reasons for the decline have been much debated, but there are certainly some agreed upon causes: decreasing state funding for education, increasing student debt, an inaccurate but persistent belief that majoring in the humanities will lead to higher unemployment, lower salaries, and a long-lasting culture war against academy in general and the humanities in particular. It can be argued that the humanities have a marketing problem, but there has also been a shift in emphasis from a general education aimed at citizenship to turning colleges into job training programs. I believe a case can be made that disciplinary subdivisions, while they make sense in terms of producing scholarship and training individuals to pursue such scholarship, have little appeal from an undergraduate perspective. Undergraduates are generally not going to take an English class because they plan to become literary critics or professors at an English department. Yet many classes are very much about teaching the standards of a specific discipline, whether it be history or religious studies. But for undergraduate students' classes that focus on a specific skill, such as close reading, for example, or on what one could call big ideas, make much more sense. The Shimer classes already are, to a large extent, organized along those lines. Our college is currently undergoing a general institutional review, trying to prepare for the future by optimizing its offerings in ways that will prevent a sharp drop in enrollments. I believe the Shimer School could help lead the way to reconceptualizing the humanities along less disciplinary lines. This could lead to formal institutional reorganization, such as merging departments, for example, but that would not be necessary. Faculty could remain in disciplinary departments as long as they were willing to teach undergraduate courses in more integrated ways. What if we reorganize the undergraduate curriculum around a set of concepts that foregrounded topics, skills, and ideas central to humanistic work and central to the interests of the students? What if the humanities were marketed within the academy by the names of their best and most important ideas and not by the names of disciplines? One way to put such a change in place would be to reorganize the existing curriculum into modules. Such modules could come in two types. Skill modules would focus on practices, language learning, writing, speaking, historical, culture, and social analysis, the kinds of things that current gen ed courses try to cover. Theme modules would focus on topics: social justice, migration studies, the problem of God, wealth and inequality, ideas of beauty, society and technology, and so on. Some schools have offered this sort of course under the label of big ideas. Each of these classes could have readings from a variety of disciplines: history, literature, social sciences, environmental studies, and they could also cross time periods. I think Shimer could offer a model of courses that are not restricted to a specific disciplinary approach. Many of our courses not only cut through time, cover long periods of time, but also have readings from a variety of disciplines. They're focused around certain topics, like our What is Matter course, or, courses centered around theological ideas or the problem of God, and so on. So I think these are things that in some sense we are modeling. Now, I would also point out, as a caveat, that in order to fit into North Central College, our curriculum was modified to some extent, particularly to produce a Shimer major. In my opinion, this had the effect of bringing some of our classes closer to a disciplinary model, and thus making them more like the classes offered by the departments that we're trying to avoid competing with. So paradoxically, in order to fit in to the institution, our courses became more like the already existing offerings of closely related departments, such as philosophy or religious studies. Of course, there's still significant differences in how we teach our classes and the kind of readings that we have our students do. I would love to hear what you have to say, both my colleagues and everyone else, about the direction that we have been going so far, since joining North Central, and the direction that we would hope to move into when we, into the future. Thank you.
Okay. I'm assuming that we'll go ahead and have everybody from Shimer speak, and then we can just open it up for general conversation. Though, if the three of you who remain would like to pause and hear out any issues that have been raised already, because I think that your three talks form a sequence in their own right in some ways, because they deal more with sort of direct pedagogical issues. Do you have any preference?
It seems best to me to just get all the papers out on the table and then have questions.
Okay.
And I guess maybe I'm volunteering to go next. Let me shut the door so the dog doesn't disrupt here. Sorry to give everybody vertigo. Okay. So, co-authored title for this paper, Bringing the Horse to Water, the Great Books as Gen Ed Requirements. So in stark contrast to great books programs like those found at St. John's or the old independent Shimer College, for most undergraduate institutions, including North Central, the watchword is student choice. Students choose which major or majors they wish to focus on, and most general education programs are less a coherent curriculum than a smorgasbord of options that aim to ensure that students are exposed to certain disciplines and topics without prescribing the form or content of that exposure. Only a handful of courses are truly required, and most of them are either skill-based, like the infamous freshman comp, or have varied topics, like the first-year seminar requirement typical at small liberal arts colleges. So in terms of strictly required content, there's essentially none. I think there are very serious questions we should ask, not only about its pedagogical value, but its institutional effect in pitting departments against each other in a zero-sum competition for students, as Daniela has mentioned. But whatever we think of that, it's clear that students have not only accepted, but deeply internalized the choice paradigm. What is most valuable to students is what they choose, above all their major. And while they often tolerate or even dare to enjoy courses that are taken to fulfill smorgasbord style gen ed distribution requirements, truly required courses are met with emotions that range from impatience and indifference to outright resentment. It can take some work to engage students in a course they chose for a distribution requirement, especially if it's not an area that they like or feel like they are good at. After all, the number one goal of most college students is never to be made to feel like they don't already know something. But in a truly required course, the instructor faces an even more severe uphill battle. My colleagues will talk about the challenges of teaching in a Shimer Great Books style in smorgasbord style requirements. I want to focus on the true required courses. I've taught 4 such courses during my time at North Central. 2 were primarily skill-based composition courses, and 2 were variable content required seminar courses. But all 4 courses shared in elements of both approaches. The composition courses were envisioned as hybrids that have an overarching topic and readings, while the seminar courses had required assignments meant to develop or demonstrate skills. This means that in all 4 classes, there was room for me to attempt to do what I have been trained to do for 10 years as a Shimer faculty member: assign challenging readings and engage students in rigorous open-ended conversation. In the remainder of my talk, I will go through these courses in turn, reflecting on the precise degree of resistance and resentment that my approach caused. I will start with the course that I taught the most times and with the greatest success: a first-year interdisciplinary seminar that I was able to offer in 4 consecutive quarters. I chose a topic that both aligns with my academic research and seems tailor-made to engage undergraduate students: the devil, or more specifically, the meaning of selling one's soul to the devil. The core of my syllabus was the Legend of Faust, which I presented in many versions including excerpts from the original chapbook, Marlowe and Goethe's plays, and Murnau's silent film. I also provided biblical and historical materials that were closely tied to the various Faust texts, as well as artworks and music directly tied either to the Faust theme or the theme of the devil in general. Overall, my syllabus in principle allowed students to feel like experts in this Faust legend without feeling like things had gotten too boring or repetitive. So it kind of fit the goal of giving them a single course that had like a clear kind of takeaway. The structure of the course also fit nicely with the writing requirements prescribed to me, which ranged from a more reflective paper to a full-blown iterative research project. The first time I taught it was a disaster. Part of the problem was me. I leaned too hard into the Shimer paradigm, throwing them into the deep end with Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, ostensibly to acquaint them with the Faust story, and attempting to do pure open-ended discussion with a much bigger group than I was used to. But part of the problem was the students. My first time doing the course was in the spring semester. An oral tradition among the North Central faculty held that students who waited until the spring were least motivated and focused on the course. I had many strong students in the class, so I don't think it's a matter of ability, as some of my colleagues seem to imply. Rather, the main problem seemed to be that by waiting so long, these students had many fewer options and were in some case forced to take whichever course fit their schedule, no matter what the topic, so they lost the benefit of choice. When I taught the course again in the fall, the stars aligned. The vast majority of the students had actively chosen my section due to their interest in the topic, and I had moderated my demands by shortening the readings and starting with more digestible material. Perhaps more importantly, I'd come to think more intentionally about how to cultivate discussion in a group of students who were neither acquainted with nor expecting a discussion-centered approach. Using small group exercises and in-class writing, I was able to work my way up to the point where, by the end of the term, even the supposedly accursed spring term, I could simply open the floor and expect a good conversation. I'm sure my colleagues all have tips and tricks along the line, but for me, the killer app was repeatedly telling them what my goal was and how I thought each baby step would contribute. In the end, the seminar on the devil became one of my favorite classes to teach and increased my confidence as an educator, even after my unpromising beginning. More recently, I've taught a somewhat odd course that is conceived as a senior capstone for students' gen ed experience, similar to a senior seminar within their majors. As with the first year seminar, I was able to choose the topic, and I opted for a focus on utopia and dystopia, hence on the future, a suitable theme, or so I thought, for graduating seniors. Here again, in my first offering, I over-assigned 2 difficult readings. Thankfully, the greater maturity and experience of these students meant that even on Zoom, generating discussion was not a challenge, though keeping them text-focused was. Overall, I walked away from my first semester with very positive feelings, at least until I got the evaluations, which were frankly devastating. Students complained about the readings, and I responded accordingly by greatly reducing and restructuring the reading load when I repeated the course this current semester, which also appears to be going well, but who knows. The vast majority of the evaluations, though, seem to be venting about the sheer existence of the requirement as such. Students were generally very confused about the purpose of this course, which is a relatively new offering, and there is virtually no buy-in with the idea of a gen ed capstone. Required courses are baby stuff, it seems, and seniors should be able to focus on what they want. The ability to choose one's topic was not enough to counteract the deep resentment at having to submit to a non-chosen requirement at such a late date. I will now turn to the more composition-oriented courses. I will admit that a big part of the problem I faced there was that I am simply not trained in that style of pedagogy. I am unsure of what one does with class time in a writing course, and none of the exercises I tried ever felt like a real class to me in the same way that a class discussion did. My training in the Shimer program made me very confident in my ability to help students revise and rewrite their work, but that approach is extremely time-consuming, especially in a large class, and also presupposes some basic ability to get words down on the page, which I could not presuppose in my students. I was also mostly acquainted with writing as a means of analyzing and critiquing other texts. Hence, I leaned too heavily on the readings, which might have been okay if not for the fact that students tended to believe that there should not be any readings in what is, after all, a writing course. The impression that reading and writing are two radically separate activities is reinforced by the common pedagogical focus on autobiographical and reflective writing. Getting them to write about something other than themselves and their opinions was a constant challenge. And getting them to analyze and critique the text was an uphill battle when most of them faced very serious challenges of basic reading comprehension, even though I had assigned mostly journalistic texts and easier fiction. In the end, I tended to use the assigned readings almost as a scratch pad, asking them to pick out particularly striking sentences and then putting them on the board to analyze how they worked and how they might be revised. But even in those exercises, it seems that few students were sold on the idea that reading in a serious and analytical way is the most reliable method for improving your writing. What have I learned from these experiences? The biggest thing is how self-selecting our Shimer students have always been and how easy it was for me to take that for granted. My experience at Shimer led me to expect a certain level of preparation in both reading and writing, and an intellectual flexibility and creativity that turns out to be unrepresentative of most college students. At the same time, I also learned that a modified great books approach, text-centered and discussion-driven, can be successful, at least in courses that the students think of as content-focused rather than skill-focused. In the latter, it seems that our approach is a bridge too far for most. Though even there, I did reach a handful of students who enjoyed the discussion pedagogy, some of whom went on to take my Shimer courses. In fact, somewhat heartbreakingly, one student, a graduating senior in a composition course for upperclassmen, claimed that our discussions, which I experienced as halting and mediocre, were the best he had ever experienced in his entire college career. So hence, I would say that we great books pedagogues need to find ways to stay true to our commitments, even in the most unfavorable territory, not only as a way to draw students to our classes and students, but more fundamentally because students deserve that level of rigor and engagement that we are uniquely positioned to bring to the table and that they are not guaranteed to find elsewhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to go next. Okay, Stuart, Aaron and I decided this in private conversation. Is that okay? Yeah, so I gave mine a name sort of after the fact because I wanted to keep up with my colleagues who all had very clever names. So I'm going to read you the name. Pedagogical Fluidity as a Means to Academic Rigor, the Great Books Classroom Writ Large. And what I really want to talk about is very much dovetails with what Stuart, Daniela, and Adam have already said, and I'm sure it's going to dovetail with Aaron. But I want to talk about my experiences, which are very similar but slightly different than my colleagues. As I said, when we came to NCC, I'd been teaching exclusively at Shimer for 21 years, and my very first class at NCC was a 35-person course that was a gen ed course. Now, unlike what Adam's talking about, mine, I teach gender, sex, and sexuality. So it was an elect, they could choose it, but actually I take that back. I didn't teach it until the spring, which is significant because Adam, you mentioned this as well. I had a lot of seniors who wound up taking the course because they'd put off their gen ed and it had a reputation for being a very easy course. And this is what was challenging to me, is because this course had a reputation. You just see videos. They sometimes had a book, sometimes not. I chose to teach it as a core text. I used great books. I had them order 6 books. I only did it as primary sources. So this is, they're coming in here thinking it's an easy gen ed. And The first time I taught it, it went reasonably well, but I had a little bit of trouble making sure people did the reading. Then I borrowed an idea from Erin, which I'm very grateful for. I don't think I did this until the second time I teach. No, you know what? I think I did it the first time because I talked to you a lot about it first. So what I did is I instituted a reading journal, which actually when we were in person, I would collect it 3 times a semester, and they had to write 2 pages on every single reading. So that would ensure that they'd done the reading. So 2 full handwritten pages on every single reading. And I went through and actually checked, did they write on every single reading? And I made that a large percentage of their grade. And actually that's something just parenthetically I'd like to say is better online, because now that point I would only collect them 3 times a semester. Now I read them every week. And I have to say, it's labor intensive, but it makes for excellent discussions because I read these reading journals every week. So I know what they're thinking. I know who's not on top of the text. I have a very good pulse on what's going on in the classroom. The other thing I instituted was they have to ask 2 questions, and those they submit online before each class. And I teach twice a week. So every day I read those questions in the morning. They have to submit it by 8 in the morning. Class starts at 10. So I read them every day and I make notes of various people I'm going to call on. So I basically base a lot of what we're going to talk about in class on those questions. And I highly recommend it. It's been very effective. And in the classroom, 35 of them, we sat in one giant circle. It was a little awkward, but we'd smushed into a huge circle every day. So, and I had 3 rules. They had to get the paper copy of the text. No electronics were allowed in the classroom at all. If I saw the electronics, I would tell them to put it away. If I saw it again, I'd actually ask them to leave. And so the text, no electronics. There was one other thing I instituted, but I can't remember what it is right now. Wait, I have it. Oh, and every day at class, they'd hold up, do you have your book and do you have your reading journal? And I graded every single day of class and I kept track of that grade. And I said, half your grade is bringing your book and your reading journal to class. So every day, that's how I took attendance. They'd hold it up. I just want them to get used, because, going back to what, my colleagues are saying, having students who aren't text-based just get used to holding a text, having a text, referring to the text. So this is something I've really tried to teach them, is just to really go to that text. And I model that for them. I don't lecture to them. I don't go to don't show PowerPoints, mostly because, as my colleagues know, I really probably don't know how. But I want to model to them, I read the text. What are we talking about? Let's look at the text. They ask me a question, I answer from the text. So then they start doing it to each other. So that's been, it's been fairly successful, but it's a challenge. They're taking a course called Sex, Gender, and Sexuality. They're expecting mostly contemporary stuff. We read some Aristotle. We read a lot of, we spent a whole unit on Sojourner Truth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Frederick Douglass, we're doing a lot of core, older texts. I can't say core, they're not part of a traditional great books, but we're only doing primary sources. And then I have us work our way up, and the contemporary sources I use all quote from the early primary sources. So I want to teach them about an integrated curriculum just within that course. And what I have done now after doing this, I've taught this course now, I think 7 or 8 times. I do now show some videos in the course. We always have a reading. For every day of course, we have a reading. I found the videos perk them up a little bit. I teach it's an hour and 20 minutes, and sort of at least those students who aren't great with the reading, the videos, it gives them an opportunity to learn to at least articulate their ideas. I've also had to expand what I know. A lot of our students at NCC and a lot of the students who take my course, football players, sports people, lots of sports people. So I've tried to really learn a lot about gender, race, and sports. There's actually a Nation sportscast. I don't know if you know David Zirin, the Edge of Sports. He's an awesome sportscaster. listen to that every week now, so I can incorporate that into what we talk about. So that's how that one's worked. I want to talk about two of my classes, and then I have questions that I'd like us to talk about to really get some input on, because this isn't just a celebration of what's going out well. I also have some real concerns that I'd like to get input on. So in my Shimer classes, it's been a big challenge, and because actually much more so, because what's happened, as Stuart talked about, our enrollment has dropped. I'm 21 years at Shimer College. I'm used to that student who loves the great books, who just, you don't have to worry about giving 80 pages of reading. I actually had a reputation of giving a lot of reading. In my feminist theory course, I had them order 15 books. So I have that reputation. Now, the problem what I'm experiencing is a lot of the students in my gender and sexuality class are taking my Shimer class. They're not, they're kind of expecting something a little bit more often, I don't want to say fun, but I just had this term, I'm teaching Western political tradition. It used to be our class, where you do read Aristotle, Plato, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, etc. I actually, as Adam knows, he's the last Shimer person to teach it. I wound up having to take 3 books out, and I've taught this class for years, but I couldn't fit it in because I can't figure out how to teach these with the amount of readings we used to do. At Shimer, we think nothing of giving them 50 pages a night. My experience with the students is they just can't do that. They'll do the reading, but really more than 25, 30 on something like Aristotle, Plato, Locke, they can't do it. So that's one of the issues, is how to make, that's the fluidity part. I mean, I'm bringing rigor to the gender and sexuality course, which, by the way, the reason I talk about that one too is it's an interdisciplinary program. It's kind of, I think it's on par, well, I guess we're a school, Stuart, but I mean, it's also one of the interdisciplinary programs at North Central College. I mean, yeah, so it's interdisciplinary. So I'm teaching in 2 interdisciplinary programs, but very different types of courses. But the 2 issues I have with the Shimer courses is, one, that having to reduce the amount of reading. The other issue that I'm finding very challenging is one of the things that I love the most about basically the Hutchins program is that integrated core curriculum. So I knew the students who are taking my course are simultaneously taking a natural science course and a humanities course, and we could refer to all those courses. And that was one part of the magic of what happened at Shimer College. They're all marching through the same program. So as somebody who's familiar with the whole program, I could refer, oh, you're going to read this next term, and this is what you've read that last term, and I could integrate it all. But now what I'm really missing is I have students, as Stuart talked about, who are just popping in for maybe one course. They're more and more taking, like I have several students took my course last fall, now they took this one. So that's been fun. I can at least refer back to one course, but you can't, I don't know what happens to a Hutchins style program when you lose the integrated core part. When you're sort of, each class becomes an isolated learning opportunity. We're teaching a body of knowledge, but I mean, I can gesture at what they may take if they take another course, or what if they took a previous course. But the only way to provide that context is if I do it, as opposed to letting students do it, or as opposed to knowing they're going to read that material. So that leads to the 3 of the questions I have is, one is, how do we adjust the rigor of our Shimer program to fit this new academic setting? I mean, as Adam said, as Stuart's talked about, we just aren't getting these amazing, quirky students who just can't wait to read this stuff. We have a lot of very pragmatic majors. So what do we do? How do we adjust that rigor? And how do we make our core? I think, Daniela, you proposed some interesting solutions with this, like the modules, but I don't know what becomes of a core? What are we as Shimer College when our curriculum is no longer integrated whole? And I don't even know how to attract students then to the college, because it's sort of like you're taking courses here and there and fitting it in between your physical therapy major or whatever. It just makes it a little harder to form this intellectual continuity. And then the third question I'm interested in us discussing is how can we as Shimer College offer some kind of model for a possible revising of how we think of gen ed, and try to, I don't know how we break the sclerotic, just that rigidity of this the disciplinary competition, because there's so much competition. History wants to make sure they don't lose their students, and English doesn't want to lose their students, and try to teach what we have learned is so beneficial, which is let's work together to create a compelling general education program based on core texts, not fight for institutional and disciplinary dominance. So that's my thoughts. And I forgot to look at my notes. So maybe, hopefully that's what I had written my notes about. Yeah.
I thought you just memorized your talk.
No, I have a whole bunch of notes, but see, unlike you all, I didn't put them on the computer, so I didn't want to have to keep looking down. So I just decided to do it without looking.
I've divided my screen into Zoom on the top half and my paper on the bottom. So let's see if I can, which I've never done before.
Yes, so that's beyond my ability.
Well, I'm going to
Do
speak
it side by side so you can see more of your paper at the same time.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'm gonna speak quickly, or at least cut a bit of what I have here, because so much of it does echo what my colleagues have said, and I'm really interested, most interested in hearing advice and some answers to Anne's questions. So the title of this is "Bitter on the Tongue, but Honey in the Stomach: Teaching Great Books to Unwilling Students." And I'm going to start with a quotation from Scott's paper that we've mentioned he gave at the Shimer College in 2011. He notes that liberal arts core text programs are viewed as an education into the complex world of adults, and thus an aid in maturing judgment. Part of that complex world of adults is the adjustment that adults make to the institutions they come to participate in, including universities and colleges. These words nicely frame the remarks I would like to make concerning the efforts of us Shimer faculty to make adjustments and to suffer various adjustments in the new situation we found ourselves in the last few years. I'm going to focus here on the experience of teaching a specific class at North Central College, NCC. It's Shimer's introductory natural sciences class. It's called The Shape of the World. And how what I've learned might inform new pathways, or as Scott Lee says, adjustments for a great books program like ours. When we first arrived at North Central College in 2017, besides the fact that we were no longer a college, but a school within a college, we weren't set on making major adjustments to our curriculum and pedagogy. We were focused on holding on to what we had despite the great change we had just experienced. And frankly, we've been quite lucky to be able to still say we're a great books program offering great books majors. It's true, our majors have shrunk a bit, as people have mentioned, in deference to gen ed classes that our students have to take outside the program. But we still have an immersive experience in core text that looks very similar to what we offered 10, 20, 30 years ago and more. We still have small classes seated around the same hexagonal tables. Faculty members still walk into class, plop their Plato or de Beauvoir on the table, and ask the students what they think. But, and this is something that is still just dawning on us now, or at least on me, in order to really fit into our new home, in order to reach the most students that we can, in order to make as many adjustments as we can in their lives, we are going to have to adjust as well. Adam is informing me that the tables are octagonal, which just blows. I'm going to have to stop reading here. Yes, they do have eight sides. Are they octagonal? Okay, man. I'm gonna have to rechange everything here. In this class, The Shape of the World, a class that all Shimer majors take, we attempt to give students a sense for the scientific worldview in the West prior to Galileo, Copernicus. We start with the pre-Socratics, move on to Plato's Timaeus, bits of Aristotle. We read Lucretius, and we also look at some Chinese and Indian science, as well as medieval Islamic and Jewish science / philosophy. The difficulty I've had with this class, and it's an issue with most of the lower level Shimer classes, these are the ones that attract non-Shimer majors, is that there are more non-Shimer majors than Shimer majors. So it's something that you've been hearing about for the last hour or so. It's a Shimer class. We discuss Aristotle, Plato, and whatnot, seated around a octagonal table. And yet it is filled mostly with students who don't know what they're in for. They're expecting lectures, videos, a textbook, hoping for a science light experience. Instead, I ask them what they think of Heraclitus. They actually do pretty well with Heraclitus and the other pre-Socratics. And they don't flee for the hills when it comes time for Plato and Aristotle. Lucretius, I would say they downright enjoyed. I've taught the class now twice, and this has been my experience. As I write and speak these words, I have to feel a little proud. That's not nothing to introduce these texts to mostly freshmen majoring in business, HR, sports medicine, kinesiology, at a school that doesn't have the highest academic standards. And yet it's clear to me that even though the Shimer faculty has revised our curriculum 3 times in the last 5 years, there's much revision still to do as we come to terms with the expectations of the students filling our classes. So here's the question. How do I reach these students, give them something worth taking in what might be the only real liberal arts class that they ever take, without diluting the experience for the Shimer majors, who really want what we have to give them and are planning to give 4 years of their lives to it? In an interesting contrast to the Shimer classes I usually teach, I have a class this semester on public speaking, sort of the counterpart to the Gen Ed class on writing that Adam talked about, that I would consider to be the complete opposite of a Shimer Great Books style class. Usually when I teach a course outside of the Shimer school, say in philosophy or the writing class that Adam mentioned, I attempt to Shimerize it, to read some classic texts, get some good discussion. But for this public speaking class, which I was assigned without a lot of time to prepare, I decided to just teach the syllabus I was given. No great books, not even any good ones, just a textbook, and nothing against this particular textbook, but 21 students in the class, me up front. In 20 years of teaching, I don't think I've ever had a syllabus with just one book, and that a textbook, on it. Students read textbooks in a very particular way. They read them for answers, which is smart because that's what they're written to provide. The usual exercise I use with pretty much any reading, which Anne already described, I do it slightly differently now. I have them jot down 3 questions instead of having them do more extensive writing, but I think it works just as well. That's not working in this class, to put it nicely. There's just not much to discuss. The textbook gives common sense advice on giving speeches, and you can take it or leave it. So we don't spend much time on the readings. However, this does not mean that the students are not doing the reading. For the most part, they are, which leads me to the first adjustment I've learned to make. As long as the reading isn't too long, the students will do it. Adam basically, shared this message with us. In The Shape of the World, we split Plato's Timaeus, not an easy reading, into 2 days. This is on a Tuesday-Thursday schedule, so it's a pretty long class, hour 20, hour 30. And they do pretty well. I'm thinking of maybe in the future giving them even 3 days on it. Now, keeping readings to a reasonable length seems like an obvious lesson for someone like me to learn, but it's fairly easy in a core text environment where one feels a certain pressure to read the whole book, to let readings creep up to 50, 60. I don't think I've ever gone to the 80 that you mentioned, Anne, but the spirit is there, right? You want to finish The Republic. You want to finish Dostoevsky or Middlemarch. You don't want to go through 80% of the book. Hey, let's just finish it. Let's just read 100 pages for this last class or this last week. In the old Shimer, with those kinds of students, you could get away with it. Now, not so much. Which brings me to my second adjustment, consistency. Many of the students that we're seeing now in our Great Books courses don't go to college because they love to read. They go because they've made the decision to spend money now so they'll make more later. They know they have to do some work, but the energy they're planning to expend on that work comes not from passion, but from calculation. They are expecting a predictable amount of work every week. And once I've set up certain expectations after the first couple weeks, I break them at my peril. As much as I might want to just finish the book, such surprises demoralize and confuse the students. They don't enjoy it. They're not readers. And if I want to turn them into readers, if I want to hook them, I have to meet them where they're at. Once I've done that, perhaps I can bring them closer to where I am, to where I think, all want our students to be. The journal questions, which Anne described and I've mentioned already once, they've tanked in the class that I'm teaching now. But they've been very effective in the mixed classes, these Shimer classes with a preponderance of non-Shimer majors. The questions get them reading and give them something easy and consistent to complete before class. And obviously they give us something to start the conversation with, right? Perhaps they don't get through the entire reading every time. Perhaps they're not good at reading critically yet, but the questions provide a place to start and are a way to teach the first lesson of a core text class, to think about what you're reading, interrogate the text. Variety is another lesson in adjustments I've learned from classes like The Shape of the World. Unlike the old Shimer classes, I can't just walk in, sit down, and listen to the students debate the text. I can start with the journal questions, but I have to introduce some variety into the routine, perhaps having them discuss a question in a small group, or having one student ask a question and another answer. Perhaps I skip the questions one day, give an introductory lecture, watch a video or look at some images, and then discuss the text in relation to that new material, which is almost exactly what Anne was describing as how to use these kind of visual helps. But within the variety, there must be consistency. There must be reading every day. Ideally, in my experience, and this has had to bear some whittling, 20, 30 pages a day for most of the kind of core text that we might assign. And there's got to be some discussion every day that gets them to go past their usual anecdotes and sort of personally centered thoughts and think critically with their peers about what they've read or seen or listened to. I'm going to wrap this up soon, so I'll go briefly over some of the other adjustments teaching this class for the last couple of years has led me to. Beyond consistent shorter readings and a general sense of variety, I've been led to think very carefully about the readings I assign in the first couple weeks. This is something Adam has mentioned. When Shimer was at college, we might assign 50 pages of content and expect them to have it read when they walked into class that first day. That, I'm realizing now, was a great privilege, which I did not respect at the time nearly as much as I should have. We have to be gentler now. First readings need to be representative classic texts, but they also need to be good at hooking young minds. The pre-Socratics in a science or philosophy class work excellently. Students take to the imaginative flair of Thales or Pythagoras, and from there you can lead them gently to Plato and Aristotle and beyond, sort of like boiling a frog, I guess. In our lower level literature class, a first day reading like Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock also works like the pre-Socratics to intrigue students for whom a lot of other poetry would have them fleeing to their advisors. Another lesson learned: I can't let the books simply speak for themselves. This is something that I think Adam articulated very well in talking about this kind of baby steps and convincing them that you know what they're doing and you have a plan behind your readings and your syllabus. Students have to be convinced that a certain book belongs in a certain class, and they want each class to be about one thing. Like Adam said, if you're teaching a writing class at NCC, don't assign any reading, or at least, make those assignments and those readings short and digestible. They'll look at you, shake their heads, and communicate with their eyes. This is a writing class. Why are you assigning reading? I know the rebuttal you have on the tip of your tongue, wise professors, but it doesn't work. I've tried it. For The Shape of the World, that thing, the thing that the class is about, has been the drama of the two-sphere universe of the ancients, which of course Aristotle gets a lot of credit for. which turns into the solar-centered system of Copernicus and into our own decentered universe. I didn't really plan for this to happen. I honestly don't think about my syllabi as being coherent. I expect the books to speak for themselves, or I used to. But this is the narrative that came out as I tried to justify the syllabus and the readings to the students. Every day we would have to review, what are we reading? How does it make sense with what we've read? What's the through line? And that's kind of what's come out. This demand for cohesion comes, of course, from the textbook-driven model of their other classes. But I found that I can accommodate that demand without diminishing the variety and fecundity that I want my own classes to convey, and that I think we depend on the books to just sort of illuminate them with, right? That there's just so much in these books that you can't limit it to say it's about one thing. I think professors, people like myself, bristle when we're told to narrow the focus of our syllabus because you can't put a leash on Plato's Republic or Paradise Lost. But I think we can frame our courses in such a way that the students feel safe and feel that they're getting what they signed up for. So that the title of the course, the syllabus, the way it's described really have to cohere in ways that take a lot of thinking. And once the withdrawal deadline has passed in a given course, well, maybe the leash can come off. So what good can these students take from my class besides the science designation they're after? Most of them won't take another Shimer class again, and perhaps won't take another class anything like a Shimer class, be it religion, history, art. What can we offer that type of student while still giving the Shimer majors a substantial experience? What I've offered up today are obviously just the beginnings of an answer, and it feels too early in our case to know whether it has or will bear fruit. I don't suffer any illusions about hordes of economics and engineering majors switching over to the great books. So I think I'm gonna leave it there. The questions are sort of hanging out there, the ones that Anne asked, and I think I really want to hear people respond to Danielle and Adam as well. So let's have your questions, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Scott, take it away.
Okay, thank you. First off, thanks to all of you for even thinking of me. I'm, as a kind of a way to launch this platform, Stuart in particular, and you all know what I think about your efforts in liberal arts education. So I'm not going to reiterate my admiration, except to say that under terribly difficult circumstances, I don't see any diminishment of that commitment that you all share. Okay, and you know that I mean this sincerely. Anybody might say this, but you know my regard for you. I do want to make some comments, kind of like the way I heard this, about the way I received it. And that is to say that almost all of my experience, unlike yours, was actually teaching in first and second year gen ed courses. Okay, in institutions which did and did not have Cortex programs, many of which should have had them. Okay, so I think I kind of know some of what you've been facing, and it is a difficulty. And I had to deal with those issues with a propensity, thanks to a University of Chicago education, a St. Olaf College education, that was much more in line with kind of an expectation of students and an expectation of being intellectually and passionately. I don't mean this is my vocation passion. I mean in the sense of, oh wow, isn't this neat to learn kind of passion? You know, that sort of passion. And so all of my comments that I will rattle off here are having been instructed by experience in teaching such courses as a way to move in the direction that both the situation that confronts you and the direction you the kind of education you'd like to provide. Am I making sense so far? Okay. So to rattle some things off, first off, collectively, you have almost everything I could think of from an experiential standpoint in my own teaching of gen ed courses in a wide variety of institutions, from community colleges to research universities. Okay, so absolutely everything that you have said, if you were to collectively pool it, and that's what you're doing, it just takes time to absorb and implement, is going to help you. You're not doing anything wrong, okay? You're doing the adjustments that you have to do. On the, I would say though that there are some things which I want to emphasize, and I want to start with Stuart. And actually, in a way, it's kind of a reference to my own article. Stuart spoke about becoming experts in general education. And honest to God, the one thing that never, ever, ever happens, and this is even true in most great books programs, and you can just flatten me with this if you want. I rarely, if ever, see a gen ed course, using it widely as well as great books, that's actually reflective about education per se, where basically the students are asked, you know, what do you think of these different kinds of education? And where do you think you fit in? What's it all for? And this goes back to or this quickly goes way forward, I think, to a remark by Adam about going to college. Why to go to college? Why you go to college? It's basically a credential game, so that what you can do is get a better income. And I do think that the plenary speaker, Jessica Houghton-Wilson, had some pretty good answers to that. But I would also say that in raising that question in your classes rather persistently, frankly, over and over again, not just one time. And maybe beginning of the semester and at the end, maybe their views have changed, right? In raising that question, what you can do is you can rely on a few students to actually tease out what might be reasons beyond getting a better income. This certainly happened to me at Temple University, where you have a wide variety of people, from people who literally never read the text. They wait for you to talk some so that they know what to think about. And mind you, I had discussion classes, to people who, were kind of eager, as I said, to learn. So I would offer you a suggestion that you constantly aim at, within your courses, at reflection, and externally, maybe with one course on education that might, by the way, be a way to invite the North Central faculty to join in some way, shape, or form. Lectures, guest appearances, how they see it, it's a controversial course. The second thing I think I'd like to go to is sort of the staging of composition, rhetoric, public speaking, writing, and reading courses. I had two of the courses that I had the most fun with were at community college. And honest to God, folks, some of the students that you're talking about sound like the students I had at the community college. Private, whether North Central is private or not, just sounds that way. And all the techniques, the journals, the questions, I would were used, and I'll get back to that. But the two courses I wanted to talk about was, there was a not ready for prime time grammar course. And I made it really technical. Now, I don't mean technical in the sense of all the distinctions that a grammar could, that a formal grammar could bring out to you, or that a linguistics course would bring out. That's not what I mean. What I had to do was figure out a way in which to cut through the confusion that is usually bred by high school education. And I'll just give you a simple example about this, and I'm happy to correspond or anything at all. And then we can talk about this further. What I tried to do was I would ask them, and I learned this from learning German. I'd give them a sentence to start the course out this way. The running and jumping rabbit leaps over the fallen log, looking behind him to see the barking dogs. And I would ask, how many verbs are in this sentence? And I would tell them to circle the verbs in the sentence. And they would, rare indeed did I get a verb. Now they circled verbals, participles, and things like this, but rarely did I get an answer of one. And the reason for this is that they'd all been taught what's the action word. And, the verb is the action word. So they go and look for the action word. I taught them it was the word that you can change the time of you can change its time, put it back into the sentence, and it still makes sense. In short, I gave them an operational way to locate the verb. And after a little bit of practice, that actually worked. Same with a subject and so forth. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is that these students took to it, and the reason they took to it was that it wasn't simply abstracted, but they had ways and means to actually do what was required of them grammatically. Okay, that's what I'm getting at. It wasn't just pointing out what was correct. It was pointing out how you get to that which is correct. And I want to emphasize that that's an art. They're acquiring a small little portion of the art of grammar. And as they acquired this portion of the art of grammar, you could just see all this fog and cloud lifting away that had been, in my view, promoted by high school education. These are all students that are not, as I said, they weren't ready for prime time. Now, let's go a little bit further. I want to talk about the public speaking businesses. Yeah, I can understand your dissatisfaction with the textbook. I did a particular textbook speaking course that I had. But I must say, why aren't you guys using speeches? They're short, pithy, persuasive. They go to oftentimes even great ideas. They are exemplars of what public speaking is, okay? And it allows you to do the readings. Now, I think part of this, to be perfectly honest and blunt, I can say this to friends like this, I hope, part of this is a prejudice towards the student who will, the work that demands 100 pages to be completed, okay? Or the work that demands 40 or 50 pages to be completed. Speeches have different demands and they have different audiences. And in a public, if you stop to think about it, there's a whole rhetorical tradition that supports liberal arts. This is an opportunity for you to treat public speeches as these compositions, as these performances, which, by the way, can be read in class. Students can read them. They can do oral interpretation of speeches. They can begin to see the power of cadences, of phrases, as well as of arguments. All of this is an opportunity for them. And I would then say, then you can get around to the notion where, the difficult notion of all they want to do is talk about their own opinions. Well, have them persuade you about something they want you to do, okay? Have that, it's going to be join a club. You will be amazed at how much more they begin to assemble their thinking. When you say that, when you get to that point, you're in the position to say, well, what do you think these speeches are doing? Let's pay some more attention to them. And you might then get to some classical rhetorical formulations. Actually really introduce, I say this in my book, I say this elsewhere, I've said this repeatedly. We have all these great books programs, and every single one of them attends to none of the rhetorical formulations that have been the backbone of, or the spine of liberal arts. Yes, the Republic. Yes, maybe the Phaedrus. No Gorgias. Now, yeah, I know Shimer. Yes, the Nicomachean ethics. Yes, the metaphysics. Yes, the physics. No rhetoric. And nowadays, no poetics. And so, no Roman orators. Invention, what's that? And you could go on and on like this. So you can pull out a few of these rhetorical formulations and give them a grip on that later as they get more sophisticated. Other things that you might possibly, or things that you're doing that work so well, I think. I used to have them, you know, I taught in that transition period where you more and more under the influence of deconstructionism, the academy was substituting itself for literature or for essays, right? You know, so you would read an essay, and these would be given to you in a textbook. You might have a choice. What I did was I had them had the students start with identifying passages in the work. They wrote them on the blackboard. It's time consuming. They wrote them on the blackboard, but what they had to do was they had to connect the passages. That was the point, was to be able to get the passages. And then after that, papers were assigned so that they layered. You wrote about one paper. This, you brought up these references to earlier texts and so forth. Great, terrific. I like it. You can do it with assignments. You read this, now your paper has to take into account, your second paper has to take into account what your first paper said on the first work and add to it through the second work, that kind of business. This is, you mentioned this basically, Adam, in your how the students were constructing, even, so to speak, their own themes, if you wish. I do think that when you get more, when you get to more sophisticated and on this business about public, excuse me, on this business about reflection, I do think, and this might work for your students, if you can begin to get them interested in the readings, you could give them a bibliography of works that don't appear in your readings, but might be related, might be. And you can ask them as an assignment towards the end of the course, or even maybe the end of the assignment, what book would you take out of this course and what book would you put in? So that they get the sense that they're constructing, that education is constructed, and they could construct their own. It's just a thought for your consideration, but it might actually work. Also gives them a little independence and substitutes for the research paper. There's one or two, in connection to the grammar course, a different course that I taught, and this again leads into all the kinds of things you're doing. I'm just suggesting, I'm trying to reinforce the liberal arts aspect of everything that you're doing. I started a literature and composition course. This is the why do we read? You know, why do we have to read in a composition course question? And I figured that most of my community college students would, in a way, kind of be asking that, and that they wouldn't really know why you would read for a composition course. So I decided I would work through mostly literature, and I started with the simplest possible piece of literature that I could think of, which was a haiku. And the reason I started with it was it offered a single perception that they could form in their heads. However they might perform it, it would be a single short perception. And then I slowly worked up to, you know, sonnet forms, then to call and response, then to short stories, hanging at who's it, Ambrose Pierce, hanging at, you know, the Civil War story, Stephen Ambrose, right? And then on eventually to Dashiell Hammett, and then on to Hamlet. And that was a composition poetics course designed to convince them that they could attain and have the skills to go forward, or the arts. They're arts, they're not just skills. So those are the quick suggestions. I feel as if I've left out some. Daniela, you're right about the competition. My suggestions on this would be to invite as many North Central faculty to participate in helping to construct integrative courses in the Gen Ed program as you can. That's one remark I would just have. That gets you, I mean, Europe competes with the US, but we're all friends, right? You know, so in the same way, it can be done. But the transformative text business could be very useful to you for that, because they might then get a sense of what you're doing, you know, and they might have an alliance, or might be a way to get them involved. That's okay. Sorry, I spoke maybe too long, but you had an awful lot to say, and I'm hoping that I gave you something back for saying it.
Stuart, you're muted.
I didn't realize I was muted. Charlie, you have your hand up.
Well, I'm happy to say what I put my hand up to say, but I'm also happy to give you guys an opportunity to respond to Scott. What would you like to do, Stuart?
Anybody want to respond directly to Scott?
No, we don't have that much time left, so why don't we hear from some other people?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first, I want you guys to write a book. You know, I remember the first time I taught the same class back to back, and I had this incredibly heartening insight that that not everything that went wrong in a class was really because of me. And then I had this sobering insight a half a millisecond later that not everything right that happened in the class was because of me, right? And you guys have this really unique, I mean, you guys must know the context better than I, but I can't think of another situation where a faculty has gone together and taken the curriculum with them from one institutional context to a radically different institutional context. It's amazing. And the things that are emerging from your experience are, I know they're difficult. I know you're living them. I don't mean to kind of, you know, be the scientist that pins a bug to a board or something, but it is really, it's fascinating what's happening. So, you know, I'll say a couple of things, but I think the main thing to say to you is that you're kind of in uncharted territory. And I mean that in terms of classroom management, in terms of curriculum, and also in terms of these campus sort of diplomacy issues and politics issues that you're facing. And so obviously, I think it's great that you came to ACTC. This, as long as you're willing, will go up as a recording. And I'm guessing you'll get, even after the conference is over, you'll get some feedback on this, or some more people are interested in your story. But none of us have your experience. None of us have done what you're doing now. And so that means that really we have probably more to learn from you than you have to learn from us. So a couple of just little things that I thought of while you were speaking, though. One is this whole thing with the public speaking in the composition classes. I really feel you guys on that, and the way that the expectation undermines even modest efforts to do what you love to do in the classroom. And I think this echoes something Scott said, but I do wonder if you could sort of confuse them by assigning speeches in the public speaking class and assigning essays in the writing class. I did that one time when I was teaching a composition class that wasn't supposed to have a lot of reading in it. We had a little, though, which made my situation different from yours. But I think I just sort of confused them by assigning really well-written essays and talking about what an essay was as a way of, so the veneer was, here's my expectation of you. And the reality was that we were reading E.B. White, you know. So there's a kind of a smoke and mirrors kind of way to give them what they think they're supposed to get, and to the same time to sort of do your thing. So that was just one thing. And you know, in speeches, could work the same way in the public speaking class. You know, here's this section of Pericles' funeral oration. Let's somebody, you don't have to memorize it, but you have to prepare it. You have to present it in a compelling way, hitting all of those marks that would be in the textbook that you decide not to assign because it's just too
I'll just pop in and I know you have a little more to say, but as
just
Scott
a tiny
was,
bit, yeah.
As Scott was saying that, I was making notes for myself because I'm going to teach the course again in the fall, and I'm going to replace the group presentation that they were assigned. And they do give a lot of speeches in that class, so there's a lot of time for them to speak. But I'm going to replace it with a recitation, right? So of a classic speech. I mean, from a diversity of sources. So this is really helpful. And I mean, I would say I agree with you, and I think with what Scott was saying, that these courses, you gotta put some good stuff in there. You know, I'm taking the textbook out. I'm gonna give them a little bit of Plato, a little bit of Aristotle. You have to be really minimal, but I think it can be done. You have to kind of sneak up on them. I think Adam and I have both realized that you can't do a dump right at the beginning. You know, you have to really sneak it up on them. But I agree with I think what both of you are saying there.
Yeah, I only had one tiny thing to add on the diplomacy issue, and I'm afraid of being presumptuous because every institutional context is different from every other one. But one thing that has worked, I have run a center, I still do run a center at Mercer that got a lot of funding, which is a different situation than yours, but it still potentially could have alienated the people associated with the center from the rest of the faculty, which I think, again, I don't want to belabor this point, but I think could be an issue for you. If one of you moved to North Central, people on the campus would embrace you, but in a way that the real strength and benefit of your situation is that you have each other, but also the real challenge you have in terms of diplomacy is that you have each other. And so, one of the things that my partner in the work here at Mercer and I did was we sort of worked around the edges. And the mechanics of that are going to be different from you. But instead of reaching out directly to the people who we feared might be hostile to what we were doing, we reached out to people who were connected to people who we were afraid might be hostile to what we were doing, and found ways to help them. Just make it easy, made it more difficult. Bridget's probably trying to put faces and names with the story, but just try to make it harder to demonize us. Not by going straight to the people who would do that, but going to their audience in a way and making it a little, because they knew us and they knew we were actually committed to something open-ended and they knew that we weren't interested in being antagonistic. It just made it a little hard to vilify us. And I wonder if that I don't know what the mechanics of that would be in your case, and I guess you've already thought it through, but just that move of not going at the problem, but going around the edges of the problem, I think
at the
works in academic setting.
Aim at the respected, open-minded skeptic. That's your target.
Yeah, I think my sense is, others can chime in, but my sense is that we're sort of past that period in which we're seen with any kind of suspicion. We've ingratiated ourselves now for 4 years, and we just actually happen to have a review from our provost that was laudatory for that reason, that we made ourselves welcome. So I don't think that's our issue at this stage. What our issue is more along the lines of what Daniela was describing, I think, and a little bit what Adam was describing. And that is, what aspect will our courses, or can our courses have, singly and together as a curriculum? How will we be a core? And serve with single courses at a time. And my question to you both, and to anyone else on the panel who knows, is I would love to create a network of schools who are facing anything like these issues, because I think together brainstorming solutions to these problems and also comparing notes on politics beyond sort of pedagogical strategies, what we can do together as programs to sort of create enough momentum that schools around the country are recognizing that there's value in this. And obviously, you know, Purdue and its Cornerstone project is sort of filling that role now, but I'd like to get on that bandwagon.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
Quickly.
Go ahead, Bridget.
Boston University's core curriculum, St. Olaf College, it's got 3 different kind of alternative cores. Mercer has its Great Books program. Those are 3 right off the bat that you could talk to about how they integrate their programs.
Yeah, that's a great thing.
And
Yeah.
which?
Yep.
Which was the first one?
Boston University. Boston University. Boston University.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and that's actually exactly what I was going to say, that, you know, I think having these different streams within a general education curriculum can work. And, you know, and I learned a lot about that at Mercer, because Mercer has a very, you know, sequenced program of great books, but then there's also, you know, a more kind of distributed track that still has some seminar kinds of courses. And students get a choice between those. And I also learned a lot from Purdue, and, you know, what we're working on at Clemson, and I think we're figuring it out, it is being able to have kind of a core text stream, or we're calling it transformative text, but within our general education curriculum that fulfills the same learning outcomes, but that is intended to appeal to students who aren't necessarily in the humanities, you know? And so like doing a roadshow right now with engineering, computer science, nursing's a big one. I had a huge triumph this week. I'll tell you all about another time with that, but you know, and I think that what we're looking at, it's not just about the text, but the text as the teacher, you know, instead of the teacher spitting up the information and feeding it in the little baby bird mouths, right? It's a different approach, and being able to have that choice for students is really important. And as faculty, you know, even in our disciplines, a lot of times we think, you know, we design these, I love this grains of sand analogy, right? And we design these curricula of how we think students should navigate, but they do other things. You know, I was talking to our chair of academic affairs for Student Senate, who's a biochemistry major who just picked up a minor in political science because he's interested in it. We have a T.S. Eliot Society that I just learned about. It's a bunch of students who are not humanities students at all. They just like T.S. Eliot, and they just get together and read. And I'm like, what? So there are these pockets of students, regardless of our institutions, that I think are interested in this deep read kind of approach. And I wrote down so many thoughts I wanted to say, and I'm not going to go into all of those, but it ties into this idea that I think Stuart led us off with, and it was a thread throughout everything, that, you know, expect that college is not just about job training, right? And the thinking, I have this analogy I use with my colleagues, that the goal of college is not to dump a mouse in a maze and get it through the other side as fast as possible, right? We want to be able to have a cognitively interesting maze that lets them explore themselves in ways we might not otherwise anticipate. We want to make sure that the cheese is something that will continue to nourish them for a lifetime. You know, we've got all these different aspects, and it's not a one size fits all. I'll shut up. But you've all made me think, and I'm going to keep thinking for days and days and days.
Great. Let me ask Reginald or Stephanie or Mark if you have anything you want to bring in. I'm curious what drew you to the panel. And
well, I would have these conversations and learn at Scott's feet every day of the week if I could. So I come to these panels to restore, because and to learn. But I had similar things to say about using speeches, and in addition to again the Purdue model and whatever steps you can take to create those streams, I guess part of what I don't understand is how many of you are there compared to the others? And on one hand, I hear you say you've ingratiated yourself and are well received, but on the other hand, I heard you use the words compete with. And so for me, I'm not sure if it's as much a competition as I don't know. I'm not in your situation, so it's hard for me to say, but I don't know if it's a competition as much as just a protection. And is like Scott said, if you integrate them or your stream is separate and doesn't, I think they want to protect their own jobs, but not necessarily take anything from you. So surely there's some sort of win-win situation that can be set up there. But I also was hearing one of you say that how do you help the ones that may only take one Shimer-ish class without dumbing it down for the ones that are mainly in your Shimer thing? So there are some students that are Shimer majors, right? And they're taking the same classes as other people, but but not for their whole degree.
No, nobody takes only Shimer courses for their entire degree anymore. Some take the full major, which is roughly speaking half of the credits that they would be taking to graduate at most. They might do more credits in Shimer, but generally speaking, we're accepting double majors or people who just can't pin themselves down.
Okay, so if it's truly labeled a Shimer course, then it's a great books course.
Yep.
And if it's, so they can double major in that, but they're getting their gen ed in this mix that's half you and half the other parts of the college.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not an honors program though, this Shimer degree.
No.
I was thinking you could maybe have them sign up for an extra credit and do some additional great books kind of work, or like a lab experience with you, or some specific kinds of things that would allow you to not dumb down their experience while at the same time you're delivering something that's already a little bit more challenging to the general population.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's been one of the challenges. Yeah, Tom Stapleford, Scott, is somebody that I've been wanting to get in touch with.
I think what Stephanie's talking about is something that Anne said as well. And, you know, it's all about the pedagogy and the scaffolding, you know, and students will read if you expect them to read and provide, you know, a guide for them to read. You know, I used to have in the first year seminar class that I taught, I used to have them reading part of existentialism, which I think came from Charlie a long time ago in a different reader. And I realized they weren't doing it because it seemed really deep and they're like, I don't get it. And so I developed something called a reading guide where about every 2 paragraphs, they would stop and answer a question and bring that into class. And then we would pass those around and they would respond to each other. And it was, you know, kind of holding their feet to the fire a little bit. And I think we're going to continue to see this. And a lot of you kind of talked about unmotivated students, which is something that we kind of see. Clemson's former president was known to say that higher ed is the only place where the consumer demands the minimum return, right? That sounds very pessimistic. But you know, that students are good data-driven decision makers, and they will put their time and energy where we tell them to put their time and energy. And so if it's just here, write this paper, and all you're going to write is good job, they're not going to spend a lot of time. But if you're, you know, they're writing a paper and you're going through and leaving them comments and making it a dialogue, like the Nancy Summers responding to student writers kind of philosophy, that's really helpful. And it's the same thing with reading. And, you know, I mean, when we move into implementation phase for our transformative text program, I think it's going to be a culture shift, but it's not just here, read this stuff. Oh, they don't read, I need to dumb it down. No, let's raise the bar and help them, you know, with these difficult thoughts that's what makes them valuable.
Tell me again, what's your average class size?
It varies. It really varies on the class. Writing classes are about 20. Some of our 2000 level literature classes will be as big as 70 or 90.
And in Shimer North Central?
Shimer caps at 14, and NCC classes, it depends. Like my gen ed class is 35. I think the others are 25. And I wanted to say something also. And did you want to say anything else, Stephanie? Otherwise, yeah, go ahead. I wanted to respond to something Bridget said.
And how many courses is your teaching load at 14 or at 35?
5.
Yeah. So, and do you do very, very thoughtful first day expectation setting and involvement, or is the culture there that the first day is kind of a throwaway day?
Yeah, I think we all
different things. I mean, I know at Shimer classes, in the Shimer class, we have reading for the first day and we just jump right in. I mean, we actually send out a reading before the first day and they have to do it. And then in my larger class, we have a video we discuss it, and I hand out a small reading because I want them to see what they're in for. So, I mean, I really lay it out so that, and I'm like, drop the class, you won't hurt my feelings, and because this is what you're going to have to do.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how much expectation setting on the first day can make a difference, and if it can be interactive in terms of getting them, as Scott was saying, as others have said too, because education is more than the job you're preparing for, it's about who you are as a human and who you are as a citizen, asking them what their goal or fear is, and instead of going through the syllabus, using whatever they put up on the board, just like a whip, really fast. I expect an expectation or fear or hope from every single student, and I just put them on the board, and then I use that to process and shape their expectations into what is the length of the papers or what kind of readings, and along the way say all of the things that come out better in little bits than one long lecture. And if I do expect participation every single class period, which I do in my seminars, getting them to hear their voice at that first class, and then also set community discussion guidelines that if they don't put everything I want on the board, then I shape that, and I help them to realize that this is the class they're going to need to put their effort into this semester, and take the opportunity to grow and shift. But I have an idea about grading, but I'll stop talking because Anne, you wanted to follow up with Bridget on something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, and then it's short. One of the things you were saying, Bridget, in terms of the existentialism and setting up reading expectations and also feedback, like if you just grade a paper and you say good or okay, and that's something, it's extremely time consuming, but I found it very worth it. For the first 1 or 2 journals that they hand in, I really read them carefully and I make comments throughout, and because I want them to know I'm paying attention. I also ask them to give their reaction to the reading, so I comment with them about it. Takes a long time, but it sets up for the rest of the semester to be so much better, because then I can sort of eyeball some of the later readings, but I'll sort of pick and choose some to really go through with a fine-tooth comb even after the first 2, so they know that I'm paying attention and that it matters. And I find that really then I get to know them through that, and they're more willing to participate in class as well. And I'll tell them in their questions, I'll say, great question, I ask it in class.
Adam?
I was just going to say, in terms of setting expectations in the first day of class, I think Aaron was right in his presentation that you need to be strategic about the first day's reading, and that we, as a Great Books program, we can't afford not to have a reading or something in the first day. We can't just afford to have that kind of phoned in, like syllabus review, like leave after 20 minutes day or something like that. I was a little bit paranoid that students would not do a reading that I did ahead of time, and that I would just be frustrated, and I didn't want to have that to be kind of the first day's experience. And so the past few years, I've been doing an in-class reading, like just the front and back of a page. and like we literally read it out loud as a class, like go around the table and then discuss it. And I, like pick like the allegory of the cave, or like selections of like the pre-Socratics on atomism or something like that. And just that gives I find that that's a good balance, because on the one hand, I'm not like putting this kind of exceptional burden on them. Like they don't expect to have to come to the first day with a reading. And I understand that. But I also want to model what the class is going to be like. And I think that's hit a good balance for me, and that's helped people to understand what the expectations are, without having an exceptional weird expectation of a reading before your first class.
Yeah, I think my sense is that in response to Stephanie, I think you hinted at the idea that we might have a sort of a shopping period where people are kind of drifting in and out for the first week, and that's not really the case in my experience at North Central. They've decided well beforehand what they're going to take, or they've had it decided for them in some cases, as Adam pointed out. Reginald, you were poised to chime in at one point.
I was just going to say thank you. I'm in almost the exact opposite situation. I work at a traditional community college, and I stumbled into great books about 5 years ago and have been a single faculty member trying to do it. So I have to say, I appreciate your comments so much, because I feel somewhat validated by the fact that journals have worked so well for you, because that's finally where I've landed at, is journals, and I actually collect their marked up readings. And to, I think, Stephanie and Adam's point, I do an in-class exercise the first day with Adler's How to Mark a Book, and I make them mark Adler's comment, and it's proved quite effective. But I don't have anything to add or to help with your situation, except to say that I feel incredibly validated, and thank you for what you're doing, because I feel like we're arriving at some of the same places and conclusions. So thanks.
Reginald, how do you do that? Like with the readings, do you actually like collect books, or what do you do?
No, I collect the journals, and I have student workers go around and just make sure they're actually marking the book.
Okay.
Just the physical, I don't care what they mark.
Right.
So the student workers help me with that.
That's a really interesting idea.
One thing I do with the journals that has proven surprisingly effective is to have students, I also make them do 5 definitions, words they know or think they know that they define, to take it deeper. And I found those definitions, I do really quick at the beginning, really dominates our discussion. I don't know why, I haven't put that together, but it's helped a lot. But I do love answers, Anne.
Just to amplify Reggie's thing about marking the book, we do pretty much everyone in our program at Mercer does a annotation project in the first year. And and we don't do it for the whole semester, but for a couple of weeks at the beginning, we set up expectations for annotation, and then we'll put them in small groups at the beginning of class, just for 5 minutes, to say, what did you mark? What did I mark? Why? And then go into normal class after that. And it's pretty good.
So do you all make them get hard copies of the books, not let them? Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So do you have plans to talk to your leadership somehow and do some integrated thing like the Purdue thing or the Clemson thing, or some of the things that Scott suggested in the chat box?
We have, in fact, a meeting with our provost and our president next week to discuss exactly those kinds of issues. So this is a very timely conversation that we're having. And I think my hope is that we will make a big gambit for something like what Purdue has. We're already pretty well situated vis-a-vis that model. We don't have to settle for 2 introductory courses that will take the place of the 2 sort of rote gen ed requirements. We could do that, but I think that would be sort of small beans in our case, relatively speaking. So I think that we have room to make bids for something like what Daniela was describing, and that is a reimagined curriculum that's going to fit a little bit more organically with what's already on the ground at NCC. I think, I love the Shimer curriculum, the way I taught it for about 12 years before we came to North Central, but it's just not going to work anymore. So I think one of the worries that I have, in fact, is what are we going to say to our alumni? Because they watch pretty closely what we do with the curriculum, because like anybody, they're wedded to what they did whenever it was they were at Shimer. And they watched very closely for the first year or two whether we were going to be denatured or not. And we could assure them that you close the door and it's still a Shimer classroom. You've got the octagonal table, and they have not become hexagonal. Sorry, Aaron. But at any rate, so yeah, we have that conversation teed up, and I think this conversation, it's focused on the pedagogical issues, but those are continuous with the curricular issues, was what I was trying to say, and I think that this has been very helpful. And that you have the impression, Charlie, that we're sort of breaking ground, at least in the route that we're taking towards setting up a Great Books program within a liberal arts curriculum. I think that gives us maybe a little bit of wind in our sails, that we can say, okay, yeah, we want the president and the provost to be a little bit creative with us, and that there aren't maybe established models. We were given to think that there might be established models that we could follow by an external reviewer that we had for the program review that we're going to be summing up next week. And that was Pano Canelos at St. John's, who had been at Christ Church. But I think he also kind of came up short for a good one size model that would fit our situation. So we may just have to create it for ourselves. And I think that we're up to that. So, but any ideas?
I think what's really unique, yeah, sure. Well, we have to keep talking. That's a given. Right. But I think what's unique is that you're doing it together. You're not, one of you's not coming in and doing it and looking for partners. You're doing it together, and that's very different, I think. Bye, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. He's going to leave his camera on. That's an interesting choice.
I think I'll turn it off for him.
Rarely seen, yes. Oh.
There we go. Okay. So I don't know when we need to wrap up.
You're at the end of the given time, but there's not another session immediately after this. So I mean, I will have to leave soon, but
right. Yeah.
That was just one other thing that came up that I'm going to keep chewing on. And it tied in with something that Melinda Zook was saying this morning. If we expect students to think and write and discuss without context, then that ends up being problematic. And I've heard the criticism from some of my own colleagues here of some of our writing classes, our 1000 and our 3000, where they're kind of in a vacuum. The students aren't responding to things. And so it kind of hurts their writing when it's in a vacuum. And I think that kind of ties in with conversation. I think it ties in with the first discussion point that, Charlie brought up as well, of how to bring these, kind of great books models into courses where students are expected to perform more. And that's a tough trade-off, but you've got to have something to respond to and talk about to bring that passion and agency into the classroom. I don't have the answers, but that made some light bulbs go off too.
Well, what I'm hoping in part in that respect is that we'll get more of a reputation on campus, and people will know what to expect from our courses or from each of us individually as faculty. That hasn't happened to the degree that I've been hoping that it might have already, but I think we're beginning to. I think Anne certainly has developed a reputation along those lines. And I think as a school, we have some very good committed students who are doing what they can to kind of cry out in the wilderness down on the south end of campus, which has a great deal more activity than our end of campus does. And that's the other thing that I'm hoping that we'll do, is balance that activity on the physical campus, because there just isn't a lot of human company for what we do a lot of the time, and that's too bad. You know, it takes students to make students, and a big part of bringing students into your classes is convincing students that they're sort of vital operations already. So kickstarting that is a big part of what we're trying to do. Well, I hate to close it. Looks like we've also lost Charles, but Charlie, thank you so much for all of the back end help that you've been offering and to giving us this opportunity.
Oh, it's been really fascinating and great. And, you know, whatever ACTC can do to support you in this, we want to do. So just please let us know.
Okay, great. Yeah. And thank you all for coming. Sorry, Ann.
Thanks.
I just said thanks for all the feedback. It was very
Yeah,
helpful.
Yeah.
much appreciated.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Everyone.